see everyone today. It's good to be here today. It's been a few weeks since we've been up here. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 12. We'll try to do just kind of a short review. We left off in chapter 11 a couple weeks ago, several weeks ago, I think, where Israel had been given this great victory. Had a new king, and Nahash came in to Jabesh Gilead and was threatening to take over. And the new king, the Lord filled him. The Spirit of God came upon Saul, and God brought victory. We saw 10 verses where there was worrying. We saw victory given in one verse. And after that great victory in 1 Samuel 11, 12 through 15, what happens there sparks what we're studying in chapter 12. So I want to read that. 1 Samuel 11, 12 through 15, it says, "And the people said unto Samuel," so after this victory, these men under Saul are going to say to Samuel, "Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death." And then you see they asked Samuel the question, but then Saul said, "There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel." Then said Samuel to the people, "Come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So you have this victory. And then you have these people who are like, "Hey, Saul ain't such a bad guy. Who didn't want him to be our king? Let's go find him. We got everything going our way. Let's keep momentum going." And then you have Saul, who God is still in, answer the question that was asked to Samuel. And he says, "Listen, this day ain't about me. God just brought a great victory." That's the right thing to say. And then Samuel, in his little way, knowing what he was fixing to do in the very next chapter, they're in a good mood. He goes, "Let's go to Gilgal. We'll renew the kingdom there." So they go, and it says they sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. Peace offerings. Okay? Why peace offerings? They wanted restored fellowship. God brought a victory, yes. But they've been told time and time again that they were wrong in what they asked for. So you have this scene set up, and it's almost like this is setting out before the Lord, and he's watching it. It's like, this ain't right. So Samuel's going to do some talking. And then in the very next chapter we studied where Samuel was a just judge over Israel. And then he spends 5 verses talking about Samuel. He said, "Listen, if I've offended you, if I've done something wrong, if I've took a bribe, if I have done any of these things, tell me now." And he's not talking about himself for any other reason than to say, you can trust what I'm fixing to say to you. What I'm fixing to say to you, this reprimand, so to speak, that's fixing to come out of my mouth, you can know it's the truth. And then he goes and he declares how great God is in verses 6 through 12. And I think we studied 14 and 15 when we left off. But they have this victory. And God brings deliverance. And if nothing else, as the children of Israel, and this enemy comes in, if we can take nothing else away from this, it's how weak and feeble we are. How much we need God. And it was a reminder of how they needed God always. And then we studied in verse 14 and 15, and we're going to read it, but before we read these, 14 and 15, we're reminded of the mercy of God and obedience to God. But then we're also reminded of what happens if obedience is not followed out. And they're reminded of the failures of their fathers. That's important. We can look back and say, they failed at this. Now we have the knowledge and experience to know where they failed. We have a blueprint so we don't make the same mistake. We don't need that. we'll just keep going on. It's worked out so far. So let's read verses 14 through 25, and then we'll start studying here. 1 Samuel 12. I don't know how far we'll get, but it says, If ye will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and also the king that reigneth over you continue following the Lord your God. But if ye will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you, as it was against your fathers. Now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before you, before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that ye may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king. So Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said unto Samuel, Pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not, for we have added unto our sins this evil to ask us a king. We'll stop there. I was going to read to the end. I don't think we'll get past those few verses. The king and the people are both mentioned in verses 14 and 15. It's like Samuel's giving this charge out to these people, and he's saying, listen, I really want your attention. I want you to focus. You've got to serve God. You cannot rebel. And he's saying it in a caring way, in a way that he's not mad. He's not preaching. He's saying, I don't want to see you go through this. We see the kingdom and the king mentioned. The people and the king. You know, the truth of the matter is one is usually only as strong as the other. We see that it was a sin in asking for a king, though God may be merciful, that God may still bless them, that God may bless this king. That's just mercy. I said that wrong because that's mercy. They sinned in the seeking, they sinned in the asking, then God brings this victory, and they and the new king, they send these praise offerings before God, and I think Samuel at this point, he's addressing the nation, he's saying, listen, it doesn't always turn out like this. Don't tempt the Lord. You're celebrating with your king, you're offering a peace offering, but God just brought you a victory. Samuel's going to remind them, do it his way. Serve him. Obey him. Follow him first. Don't follow man. Don't follow your fleshly desires. God is in control. You have a king. You asked for him. But God was in control before, and God is still in control now. What they're doing, they're thanking God for something that God didn't want them to have. I don't know how else to word it. It's a stench in his nose. They're thanking him for something he didn't. It's almost like in a roundabout way, unintentionally. They feel like they're doing the wrong thing. You can do the right thing a wrong way. They feel like they're doing the right thing, but really they're kind of rubbing his face in it a little bit. So we see that, and we see what he says, and then we get verses 16 through 18. It says, Now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. So we see the consequence to disobedience in verse 15. And then we see the Lord, he's going to show a small portion of his power to his people. You know, why should it amaze the creation when the Creator does something with it? If they really feared God like they should, and they believe God created all these things, why should it amaze them when God just sends a little bit of that power through with something he spoke into existence? God, sun was shining this morning when we got up. We take it for granted. God causes rain, wind, current, moon phases. God causes temperature change. Why should it amaze us when he shows his power? So Samuel tells them, he says, stand and see this great thing. And it's not, he says, will do. Samuel has no uncertainty in his voice. He's saying, listen, I want you to stand and I want you to see what's fixing to happen. This is fixing to happen, as if Samuel's already seen it done. He speaks with that assurance of the Lord. And then in 17 and 18, he asks him this question, is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that ye may perceive and see your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king. So Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. If you look specifically at the end of 17, you see why this comes to pass. We see why it comes about in asking you a king. If nothing else, a reminder. God's God. We ain't changing that. Keep God the God of your life. The ruler of your life. I don't want to get in this today. I don't want to give anything away for a future lesson, but it says Lord. That's a covenant God. That's what that means. God's going to keep his part. It's even more of a reminder of the God they are called to serve, of his power, of his mercy toward them, as well as a reminder of the grace found that this almighty, powerful God, the Creator, chose them. This was convicting, what Samuel was saying. To see what could have had been their fate, but yet they see a God of mercy who chose them. I was thinking this morning of this God of mercy. I believe rejoicing and thankfulness are two separate things. Rejoicing in God's mercy is hard to do, but being thankful for it sure comes natural when you see what you are. We see a specific time mentioned here. Samuel says, is it not the wheat harvest? So I'm gonna do a little bit of Jason talking. Late spring, early summer harvest, let's say. The rain becomes more rare these months. It's a dry time of year. Every year's different. But this was rare. What was fixing to happen here was uncommon. It had never been known to them before. This was divine. Samuel had no more power here than God allowed him. Samuel wasn't calling for the rains out of his own power. He knew no more than God allowed. This is what God was going to bring forth through him. It was the wheat harvest that day. And what does that mean? It was a day of reward. It was a day that meant other wheat could be planted later. It was a day they looked forward to. It was a day where you took some of that wheat and you survived on it until you planted the wheat, you sat back. Not only did you survive on that harvest, but your animals survived on that harvest. Life depended on harvest. Harvest was a gift from God. You know, the thing is we plant, Brother Roger plants, farmers plant. You plant a garden. Where does it say that the harvest has to come? It doesn't. You plant in faith. Nothing says that you're going to have enough to make it 12 more months. But it was a reward from God that he once again provided for you. This was a day of rejoicing. Just because you make it to harvest doesn't mean you're guaranteed to make it after harvest. And now on this day of harvest, rain would come. Man can't control the crop, the ground, the drought. Man can't control the rain. It's a reminder that we are at God's mercy. We are subject to his grace, his patience, and his sustaining power. You know, God created the seed in that harvest. He warmed the ground. He watered it. He grew it. He gave strength to gather it. And then he made it reproduce. That's power. Man can't replicate that power now. Thunder and rain. We read that. We all live in newer homes or homes that were different in this day and time. Maybe that's not such a scary thing anymore. Hey, go inside. It's fixing to rain. seek shelter. This was different. It was called for. Everyone in here has witnessed a storm. But none of us have ever witnessed God's man calling it down after words of reform and repentance were demanded. And clearly the only reason it was coming was for their wickedness' sake. To be told that your wickedness is great before the Lord, and then to have this roll in instantly, makes you feel pretty small. Storms make us feel small anyway, but when one's created for you, it's different. Storms are enjoyable when they're passing. Some of the greatest sleep I've ever gotten is in the middle of the night when I can hear it raining. I love it. Storms can be peaceful. Storms, the power in them, they can be inspiring, they can be encouraging. And then there's the other side of the storm that's destructive. A storm's okay if it's passing by, if it's passing through your life quickly. But when the storm's created for you, when it's seeking you, when it's on display for or against you, it changes everything. It becomes personal. That's the kind of storm we're reading about. To show these people how small they are. When that storm rolls in and it stops over you and you don't know how long it's going to be there, what can you do? It was an unusual thing here that happened during the wheat harvest. I believe it was a dry time of year. I believe when he called it, it was a clear day. There was no clouds in the sky. I see it in my mind. It was a sunny day like we're having. They had work planned. There was work to do. After this was over, they had work to do. There was plans made to work. But then the clouds just appeared in a matter of seconds. The only notice they had that these clouds were coming was what Samuel was telling them. I don't think there was even a change in wind. I don't think there was thunder in the distance. I don't think there were skies of gray. I don't think there was a cool down. I don't think a small cool breeze came in on them. This storm had purpose. And its purpose was a reminder of God's power. It was created to display power. And so I was thinking, we like to talk about storms. I talk about storms probably too much, storms of life, struggles, trials. But personal application that makes this real to us in this moment. We've all went through storms. We've all went through trials. We've all went through problems. God knew all of them were coming in our life. We all have storms that we've watched come along in other people's lives. We've been a witness to that. We witness it from a distance. Maybe there's some damage in our life, but not the major damage like they had in their life. There's those kind of storms where we're really just kind of watching it in the distance. I feel like another example of that kind of storm might be the time that we live in where things must come to pass. So that's going to bring some storms along with it. These things must play out in God's timeline. We have storms that come our way that force us to grow. Because with a storm comes rain. They come in, they tear things down for the moment, and it seems rough for a little bit, and it brings work, but in the end we're better off for that storm that came our way. We can be thankful then down the road. Maybe not while in it, maybe not during that short period, but after it passes we're like, man, God brought me through that. I needed that. We don't like it. We don't like to see it coming. But it's not a, Cat 5 hurricane coming into our life. Perhaps it brings a little repentance into our life, a little revival. Something that got our attention. The cost of that storm, it was a low, easy payment to make. We have storms in life that we go through, the loss of a loved one, scars from life here on this earth, being born into sin. Storms that are caused by the wages of sin. We all suffer loss. Those are storms. Because it hurts. But the result of that storm is sin. Just like all other storms. But certain things are certain. I kind of said that weird, didn't I? We have storms that cause or that we cause, that are part of the growing pains of maturing, of growing. We could say as we grow and we mature that we learn consequences. There are storms that are brought that are consequences to the things that we have done. But then what about the storm that they're facing? Where it's created for them, it's sent to them, and that point in that storm is saying, you have sinned. This is the exact consequence of this action. And that storm has one purpose, to show us how weak and frail we are and how strong God is. That we depend on mercy and grace for every breath. Those things are life-changing. These storms in our life, we see one thing clear above all else, that we can do nothing during that storm. We are at God's mercy. God's driving. We have no control. There's nothing you can do. You're just 100% dependent on your Creator and your Savior. That even in the pain, in the middle of the storm, in the howling wind, in the thunder, that you're finding just that little bit of mercy. Those are storms that change our life. Those are storms that make us tremble. They're life-changing. We reference those moments in a conversation and don't even know we're doing it most of the time. Well, it's been 20 years since this happened. You know, it's been 3 years and just now starting to move on. Those are storms of life that come in and destroy everything. Those are storms that come and you don't know how you're going to make it. Samuel tells them in verse 16 something that he didn't tell them before. He says, stand and see this great thing. Stand and see it. But if you look back in verse 7, what did he tell them? In this same chapter, he says, therefore stand still that I may reason with you before the Lord. He told them to listen in verse 7. I want you to listen to me. And then a few verses later, he tells them, listening's not working. You're not getting it. I want you to see it now. If it takes seeing to believe, then stand still and see. Stand still and witness. You know what you're not ever going to find? We stand still, we're to be quiet. We're to stand still, we're to watch. You don't find stand still and defend yourself. You don't find lift yourself up, present yourself proudly. They're fixing to be in a storm. They don't have any ground to stand on. We are to notice, we are not to take, we are not to demand, but to listen for God's voice, to see God's power, and perhaps even see it and remind ourselves of yesterday where we found mercy. What more could we do? This display of God's power in our life and in their life was more than they deserved. It's almost like Samuel's sitting there and he's talking to them, he's addressing the people, and he's telling them to listen, and he sees them. He sees this blank look on their face. It's not sinking in. He's like, I'm telling you, you're not getting it. So now you're going to have to see it. What are we missing in our life along the way? In our life, what are we not hearing that's being said? What are we doing that's going to force us to have to see what's coming? Samuel was talking to them and they weren't hearing. So then it resulted in this. Are we ignoring conviction? We go through a lot of that, and just like the children of Israel, we hear what we want to hear. We don't hear what God's saying. But then at the end, the thunder sounds, the storm rose in our life. We're like, where'd that come from? What did I do to deserve this? I thought everything was fine. God just smack you around, just to get your attention. Because you weren't listening. That's what he's telling them. We got to stay tender-hearted. Stay in the Word, stay on our knees. And something that I think that everybody struggles with is to be honest with yourself and say, I'm not good at this. I don't know it all. I'm struggling right now. Get over the pride with yourself so then you can talk to somebody else and say, I need you to pray for me. You know, there's things that we do on a daily basis. There's things that we talk about with other people. We live lives in front of people. We spend time gathering. That's what we do for work. We spend time doing everything. What we're doing, is that what God's will is? The way we give, the way we acquire things, is it right? If I acquire that flagpole by taking it, how can I witness to you if I just stole from you? It's hard to do. I see this day and time, I feel like there's a lot of confusion amongst God's people. I feel like we lack discernment. I feel like we're so intertwined with things of this world that a lot of time we don't realize that we may have started this journey here and we were going this direction with God, but we've actually ended up over here. Because that's how our adversary works. We feel like we know what's best. We want a king. We want this in our life. And the whole time God's saying, no, but we're just not listening. Let's look at verse 17. He asked that question. He says, I will call and God will send it. Why does Samuel say this? Why is God directing it like this? It says that ye may perceive. That you're going to know. When this is over, you're going to see it. You'll know it. You weren't listening, but now you're going to see it, so you'll know it. You're going to know, I want you to get it in your head, that your wickedness is great. And again, Samuel's a sinner. I don't believe he's saying this like ruling over you, pounding. I think he's like, please listen to me. Heed to my voice. God is speaking here. Listen to what I'm saying. Don't go down this path. Don't make these mistakes. It's going to cost your children's children's children if you keep going this way. Don't play with sin. Your wickedness is great, but he says it's not that it's just great. Your wickedness is great before the Lord. You sin before God. You sin against God. And that's something he's telling them, don't ever forget it. God's not going to sweep that sin under the rug. It's not just going to disappear. There's a wage of sin. There's a consequence. Don't forget the consequence. The things in life now, in the future of yesterday, we can't make decisions based on the moment we're in. That's what he's telling them. He's saying, listen, in the moment, in the heat of this, you're looking around at these other nations, you're saying, I want a king. Don't make this decision to disobey God based off a storm or a little season, a little small moment in your life. The whole thing. When God sends a storm in the harvest, then what happens? Fear comes too. Not even just the thunder and the rain, but the fact that, number one, you're supposed to be working out there collecting, but number two, is there going to be anything to collect? A lot of times we make the easy decision. And it's the wrong decision. We take the easy road, we take the easy money, and it's harder to take the right road that doesn't have any money on it, but has faith. That's the harder road for God's people to take. I see this road leads to suffering, but I'm going down this one. I do it all the time. Knowing I should have turned here, I keep going the easy way. Less resistance when I'm running with my adversary than when I'm running against him. If I take the easy way, can I witness to those people along the way? If I'm living life that's wrong? If I'm taking from them, if I'm bossing them, if I'm their neighbor, if I'm dependent on them, if I'm just meeting them? Am I just there for me and them, or am I there for God? Is there a purpose in that? Psalm 135, verse 7 says this. It says, He causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings for the rain. He bringeth the wind out of his treasuries. That's one of my favorite verses. I think we studied that a few times when we did the flood lesson. His treasuries. God just has it laid up like in a bank account. Like you go online and transfer money from one to another. That's what he's doing. He's saying, send a little wind that way. But the number in the bank account never changes. God's power is not reserved. God's power isn't dependent on man. He controls it. It is his strength. Be thankful for God's strength to restrain himself. Joshua 10, verse 12 through 14. We'll read verses 12 through 14. It says, Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon the enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. God always fought for Israel. We're reading this because God hearkened to the voice of a man, just like Samuel. God chose to work through man. That's mercy. It's God's will, it's God's power. I ain't saying man has anything to do to it, but each and every time Israel was there as a witness. I believe we're a witness to that. I believe in God's church. If you're got God's man speaking, you're listening to God speaking through God's man. God's word speaks out of God's mouth, but the Spirit makes it real. The Spirit intervenes. So God directed Samuel what to say, and God backed it up. There was no doubt, I believe, that ever formed in Samuel's mind that God wasn't going to go through with what he said. So back in 1 Samuel there, verse 18 now, it says, So Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. Why fear the Lord now? Had God changed? God never changed. Why did it bother them now? Because they got caught. They were just told and reminded again that they messed up. They'd heard it, but now they're seeing it. They wouldn't listen all the times before, but now they see the power of God. They see the storm. They see the corruption that could happen. God was showing his displeasure. They didn't listen to the still small voice. We don't fare well when we don't listen. We got to find out for ourselves too much. Somebody may say, please avoid this in your life. I've made this mistake. This has cost me years of regret. This has cost me years of debt. This has caused me years of just having no relationship with this person. Please avoid this. I hear you, but I got to see it for myself. Lessons learned the hard way. They leave those scars. We mess up, we sin, and then we're going to pay for it our whole life. When if we just listened, we could have avoided a whole lot of pain. If we just listened, maybe our kids wouldn't have to pay for it. But we hear it, but we don't listen. Then we see power and we see destruction. Job 40, verse 9, I'll read it quickly and we'll try to come to a close. It reads this, Hast thou an arm like God, or canst thou